This video is brought to you by Devout Decals, makers of reusable Catholic art for your home altar, your bedroom, and your home classroom.
One of the great distortions of faith and morality today, especially in public life, is this concept that morality should not be negative. There should not be thou shalt nots. Public morality should be positive, that the commands should be you will go and do this. If you need some examples, take a look what's happening in the church right now to women religious. Contemplative orders are, for whatever reason, being crushed by Rome and on numerous grounds officially, including one of the more common things we hear from Pope Francis these days is that nuns are to go out and make a mess of things. They should be active, focusing on the material works of mercy and all the rest of it. I'll leave you to decide if the destruction of contemplative life among nuns is a good idea or not. But that's one example you see. You see this other places too. The people complaining that the U.S. bishops these days ended their social justice conference and social justice offices for funding reasons, they say. Although, when you read between the lines a little bit, you can tell that the voices raised in opposition to what the organizations they're partnering with were doing. But the voices in opposition in general to that move by the bishops were very, very adamant that they were defying the commandments of the Lord by closing down that office, that our Lord commanded us to be predominantly do the works of mercy. It's true that Jesus told us to do works of mercy, go out and do material things to help people. But there's a lot more to it than that. But that is a sort of a good display of this. And the other obvious one is when enemies of the faith themselves in the public realm tell us, hey, you Christians should be out there doing just more of the Jesus stuff, helping the poor instead of condemning sinning. Even though Jesus did quite a lot of that too. Be that as it may, G.K. Chesterton has some choice thoughts on all of this. So I give to you now, Thou Shalt Not, by G.K. Chesterton. There are many people going about today asseverating that morality should always be positive and seldom, if ever, negative. How can it be either without being both is beyond my narrow medieval mind, but it is in practice rather than theory that the notion is generally praised. It is specially urged in connection with education, and we are told to offer a child the affirmative ideal and never the negative commandment commonly attached to it. Thus, we must not forbid little Arthur to pull his uncle's nose. We should rather expatiate upon the beauty of the nose in its unpulled state, poised like an unplucked flower, and our eulogy should leave to be inferred the improbability of the nose, even in the most skillful hands, being molded into a fairer thing. We must refrain from telling Oswald in so many words that he is not to stay in the dining room. We must rather exclaim in a sort of abstracted rapture, how magnificent, how magnetic is the wallpaper in the back bedroom. How impossible it must be for young and ardent spirits to resist rushing upstairs this minute to look at it. We must not say sharply, Gwendolen, cease playing the piano with the fire shovel. We must merely observe in a loud voice heard above the din, how noble is silence, older than the gods. How it would fill this chamber with its ancient absolution if by any chance Gwendolen were to leave off playing the piano with the fire shovel. I do not know whether these people really apply their principle in such cases, but this is the principle which they profess to apply. The superficial logical objection, if such people cared even about superficial logic, would presumably be that this avoidance of negatives is itself a negative, a veto upon all vetoes. It amounts to saying, thou shalt not say shalt not, which is rather close to a contradiction in terms. Nor, as I have faintly suggested above, would the change be freer from entanglement in practice than in its theory. A gentleman and a father of a family who had to go through life without saying the word no would be in as hampered a state as the young lady in the song, who was allowed to say nothing else. But indeed there is a much broader objection to this kind of argument, and to many other similar modern arguments, much more serious and influential than this. The truth is that this praise of the positive against the negative is not only an ignoring of justice, but it would be a very considerable curtailing of liberty. Indeed, to be much broader than the old vetoes, it would be, in strict practice, much narrower. For the disadvantage of offering an ideal instead of a command is that one is compelled to choose one ideal and exclude everything else. Whereas in the case of the command, we do, in the very act of the command, permit everything else. The uncle objects to having his nose pulled, and that has to be stopped, but it does not follow that he wants his nose praised. He may be shy about his nose, or he may be good-natured about it and quite ready to have it painted red, or he may be seriously discontented with his nose and delighted for one happy hour to wear a false nose from a toy shop. Or it is barely possible that he may think it rather rude and personal to talk about his nose at all. All these roads are open, all these temperaments can be satisfied. If once we have established a clear preliminary statement, thou shalt not pull. If we have to offer Oswald a positive alternative to the dining room, we can only select some other room, if we are to give him a vivid and fascinating vision of it. We must urge him to go back to the back bedroom, while the soul of Oswald himself may pant to be in the schoolroom, or the puce music room, or the coal cellar. And the whole house might have been open to that happy child if we had simply told him to clear out. If we must not denounce the noisy fire shovel, we can only praise silence in an attempt to impose it. But silence is not the only alternative. Gwendolen playing the piano, not with a fire shovel, but with some other instrument, might appear a pretty and soothing influence to her elders. She might say her piece, practice her scales, or do 1,000 popular and sociable things. The method would resolve itself into putting pressure on the child to do one thing, instead of leaving it free to do all things except one. I do not suggest that my distinction is to be taken universally and literally. It would not be strictly true to say that the inscription in a small tea shop, "Smoking prohibited," actually means that golf, bathing, the use of personal defense mechanisms, and the game of leapfrog are not prohibited. It would be an exaggeration to say that "no dogs admitted" is absolutely tantamount to declaring that tigers, whales, and winged dragons would be admitted. But such a veto, when selected, does generally mean that most other ordinary and likely things may be done. The negative commandment is a declaration of liberty. Anyhow, it is a boundless prairie of emancipation compared with the other theory of always offering one attractive alternative. For that ties down every man at the very moment when he most needs to be decisive and personal. It may be arbitrary and invidious to put your foot down, but it is a vast deal more uncomfortable to keep your foot in the air. The new principle of positive morality is a mere exaggeration of negative. It is only adding an 11th commandment. Thou shalt not command. But this little one folly is, like most of our little follies, a mere knot or coherence of vaguer but more intelligent tendencies. There is in our time a real trend towards making idealism narrow by making it what is called positive, which means, as far as I can make out, thinking only about agreeable things. It means, that is, thinking only of the moral type that seems to us successful and satisfying, and never about the types that would horrify us with their folly or failure. But when each of us thinks of the type he thinks successful, it becomes a very narrow type, and the type of modern idealism is a very narrow type. As Stevenson said, modern civilization is a dingy, ungentlemanly business. It leaves so much out of a man. In the old romances, it was the villain that was monotonous. In the old melodramas, it was the villain who always looked the same. His black mustache, eyeglasses, and tobacco were a sort of uniform on the infernal service. But the good men were of all conceivable shapes and colors, and some rather inconceivable. Don Quixote was a good man and starved himself. Mr. Pickwick was a good man and did not object to milk punch. Sam Weller was a good man and did not object to pretty housemaids. The Master of Ravenswood was a good man and got drowned. Sidney Carton was a good man and got drunk. Benedict is a good man in Much Ado About Nothing, and so is the friar in Romeo and Juliet. The old masters maintain the happiest miscellaneous and good men by having one black stick to represent bad men. It was like the patches that their ladies put upon their complexions. That one black spot threw up and set free all the changing colors and contours of real health. But today we are drifting to the opposite extreme. We are getting only one kind of good man. One who approves of international peace, one who is quite in favor of social reform, one who thinks there should be a minimum wage, but also a court of arbitration. Enough. You know him. And we have got around us, on the other hand, a very antic and extravagance of the evil man, varieties which none of the old romancers could have conceived or would have been permitted to describe. I confess I prefer the old-time notice boards warning men off particular precipices and swamps in what is, in other respects, a rolling, romantic land of liberty. And that's Chesterton giving us a lesson on liberty and how negative commandments actually protect your liberty. He has famously said in other pieces that the fences exist for a reason, and we usually don't find out why they exist until we take them down. Think about that in moral terms, and you begin to see what he's talking about. Take a look at the last 60 years of human civilization and how absolutely chaotic on a basic social and moral level it is, and then you begin to realize why certain fences existed, until some people decided that certain activities suitable to the married state should be just done for fun by people who are certainly not married. As just one example, the chaos caused by that we still live under. Let me know what you think about this in the comments, please. And like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. So does sharing this on social media. That helps a lot too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.